Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Teach Me Outbound. The series is very simple. We speak to SDRs who are absolutely smashing it and hitting quota so we can learn a thing or two and hopefully do the same. So, in this episode, I'm speaking to Will. And Will, do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, howdy mates. My name's Will. I've been SDR for about a year now, a little bit over that. Starting as an SDR back in October, just kind of smashed it out of the gates, had ball of a time, and then had a kid and just been SDRing ever since.
Awesome. And the reason I want to speak to you is because you mentioned you hit 220% of quota in less than 10 months, which is crazy. So starting with the bigger picture, how do you do that? How do you approach this role to hit them crazy numbers?
Yeah, appreciate that, mate. Well, I mean, if you're looking at a bigger picture or even like a piece of art on the wall, it all really starts with an idea of how you want the picture to be before you start painting it. And so that's how I began framing my career as an SDR before I was ever interviewed and in terms of the landscape I was in. So like after college, like my wife and I were about like $12,000 in debt with a baby coming soon, and I was frantically searching for jobs like all across the board in finance and was turned down for multiple positions, like even making like 22 an hour. But I found tech sales and specifically SDRing because I was denied for multiple SDR roles off the gate in the Santa Barbara area. Like, and I even got shot down for an internship doing like manual data entry for SDRs. Um, I was telling every interview the situation I was in. I was like, I have to take the island because there's no boats to go back to, right? I had to get after it, but finally, my manager Ian at HG actually gave me that opportunity. And in terms of how I approached the role, there was actually two principles that I kept simple and kept in mind constantly. The first one was going in. Wanted to understand how to break every activity metric possible and set my sights on every record in terms of quota, meetings booked, meetings held, etc. And so the first point is focusing on the activity and attainment. And then the second point was how you would approach principle number one in my daily activities. And so I actually got this because I read a book called Principles by Ray Dalio before becoming an SDR. And it's essentially saying growth looks like a loop kind of like this. It's starting with being extremely audacious in your activities, which is like as making as many dials as you can or crafting as many emails as you can, and then falling flat on your face and just realistically just failing. Um, like it's fun falling flat on your face because you don't get a broken nose, you just get an opportunity to get better. But from there, I was ultimately learning why I failed and then taking that and not making the same mistakes, which is essentially the essence of what improvement is, and then just repeating that cycle. And so that's kind of how I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and then this is how I'm going to keep improving upon it to get where I want to be as an SDR.
And I know you take a very disciplined approach, right? And you've talked about this before when people come up to you and say, how on earth are you hitting this number? How are you doing this many calls a day? So how do you do that? Do you have like a certain attitude towards discipline, like to the role that just keeps you going? How would you stay motivated?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I spoke to this on Elric's podcast, but mainly like the fundamental aspect is just enjoying what you do, right? Like cold calling is a fun thing to do because you get to talk to people you'd never ever get to speak about with. Um, However, when it comes to like motivating myself and getting to like why I do it, um, starting with how I make that many dials, I just clock in, go to my desk, and I start dialing. Like a lot of people ask me, is like, how do you make 160 dials a day? That's the same thing as asking, how do you run 5 miles in a specific span of time? The way you start doing it is you take 2 steps and you keep taking those steps, right? But what I found is that my why was bringing me into the office every morning to actually take those steps and run those 5 miles a day or grinding those 100 dials a day and constantly win. However, what I found is that there were points where I would go past my why and either up my results by 50% or double them on a given day or week. And that's because people are motivated by loss aversion as opposed to gaining something, right? And so the way I was doing this in, I guess, capitalizing on my own loss aversion was going toe to toe with another SDR at HG named Fabian. What we do is we'd go as hard as we could, sitting next to each other, knowing that the other person is dialing when we're not. Like when I'm using the bathroom, Fabian's got 5 dials under his belt that I don't have. So I have to get out there and make 6 dials next time he goes to the bathroom, right? But the fun thing about that type of relationship is that we would give each other tips on our cold calls and our emails to improve each other and spin the flywheel for the both of us. And so we were competing with someone who was constantly getting better. And it's ultimately like the whole value prop for going toe to toe with someone is iron sharpens iron, right? And so this took me specifically from previous highs of about 300% consistently over the course of 3 months to 400 the next, and then 500 that next month when I was going toe to toe with Fob. Just the thought of losing to him just constantly ran through my head. And I'd wake up at 4:30 a.m. to get into the office at 5:30 and start dialing into EMEA. And the dialer would actually stay hot until around 5 or 6 p.m. in APAC, and it was nice because we saved a little bit of expenses on our heating bill too. So I guess the goal is to find your Fabian and push each other to new heights.
I love that. Shout out Fabian, right? If that's any piece of advice, is
Yeah,
find someone like
shout out Fabian.
that. Awesome. So I guess that's your bigger picture, your motivation, right, in terms of how you're waking up and actually just getting through that sheer amount of activity that you need to do. So
Hmm.
getting more tactical, how do you actually approach your outreach in terms of your thought process?
Hmm.
What does the day to day actually look like? Obviously, there's a lot of calls, but how are you approaching them calls?
Yeah. Well, I guess let's begin because you can make a lot of calls, you can travel a lot of distance, but if you don't have a compass, then you're just going to end up not knowing where you are, right? And so my internal compass is understanding the pain points. This is going to sound really cliche, but the pain points of the personas you're targeting, or if you're an industry focused SDR, for example, I'm in cybersecurity. It's my job to know every niche within cybersecurity and how we support personas within those niches specifically. And so if I'm calling a company that does MDR and XDR, which is a portion of cybersecurity, I don't need to keep researching each company to the extent I've done before because I already know what the value prop is. I know what the companies in that niche are doing, and then I can formulate that and cook it up for the next company within that niche. And so that is my internal compass because I know the pain points of the persona. I know the industry I'm calling into, which leads to little jokes you can make about the industry as well. And I know the value prop there. And so now that I have my compass, I can begin making those calls. And so what my schedule is on a day to day, or at least in that time when I was doing like 300% average and then 500% going toe to toe with Fob, like my schedule was I would wake up around like 4:30 to 5, immediately throw my jumper on, get some pajamas on, and start hitting the phone if I was at home. I mean, I'd start dialing maybe around 5:30 to 5:45 up until 9:45, and then from there, go take a shower, go eat a little bit, and start doing my admin. Well, what does that look like? It's sending follow-ups to today's meetings, tomorrow's meetings, sending them a sendoso, letting them know that I actually care because sitting on like the difference between getting someone to sit on a meeting and not is actually huge, especially when you're going into Q4. From there, if I'm in the office, if it's right when the clock strikes 12, I'm the first one at the ping pong table. Like I mentioned, Fabian and I were going toe to toe. Like what we'd do is we'd go toe to toe on the phone and then take that same competition with the other SDRs to the ping pong table. From there we'd go after it left and right until you ultimately defeated the other SDR across the table, and then if you lost, then you'd have to sit in your desk frustrated, waiting for our ping pong hours to end and just start hitting the phones again. But from there, I just keep dialing until 5 or 6 p.m. Like it is quite simple in how I structure my day. Like about 3 to 4 hours is admin, and everything else is on the phone.
Nice. It must be a really bad day if you lose both in meetings booked and on the ping pong table, right?
Yeah, no, if that if that happens, then that's the day you lose a little sleep. Or there was a point where it happened to me a couple times, and I had dreams about it, right? You'd walk in and look at the whiteboard with all the ticks on the demo board, and that one person would have just one more than you, and you wake up in a frantic sweat, like,
I love it. And so you mentioned obviously we spoke previously, and you have a approach
hmm
where you keep everything pretty straightforward, like you say. There's no secret recipe. You just dial hard
yeah,
and keep motivated. But you also talked a lot about how being able to keep the basics strong allows you to test things out as well. And if
hmm
anyone's seen your LinkedIn, they've seen you in a hot dog costume, and there's other things that you've mentioned in terms of where you test stuff out. So can you just give
yeah.
a few tips on how you do this testing? There it is.
Yeah, that's great. So, um, in terms of the testing, right? Like, it is always good to stick to the fundamentals. Anyone who's ever been great at something sticks to the fundamentals on a day to day. Every athlete out there, whether it's, Kobe Bryant would watch hours and hours and hours of film, understanding his competitors and himself. Every pro athlete stretches for a reason. And that's why if you're looking to be a great SDR, you need to really double down on the fundamentals. And then once you have that down, you can explore from there. And so if I'm doing something wrong, if I feel like the fundamentals are off, I'll go back to them. I'll look at, okay, am I making the amount of dials I should be making? What does my tonality look like? Like, how am I saying what I'm saying, and how is that leading a prospect down the line on a cold call? And you can do that by listening to your calls, going off of key benchmarks from intro, angle, hook, close, and see where your progress on a call is stopping. And then you can go back to that part of the call and see why, just using a tool like Gong. The third thing I'll typically check is my messaging. What am I saying specifically in addition to how I'm saying it? Like, why is that resonating or why isn't it? There will be so many accounts where you can spend another 30 minutes just on research, go back to that account with a different angle, and turn like essentially almost all of those no's into yeses because you came at them for the different message. Odds are they won't even remember you called them a week or two later. And so it really does give you a second chance in terms of what to say and how you say it. In terms of sticking to the fundamentals, I keep a very simple script, and I have that compass I mentioned earlier in terms of the niche and industry I work in and the pain points and value that my product provides. But once you get that down, the amount of time you're putting into research on each account or an org drops over time. And so my best piece of advice is that I can't stress enough is just keeping the basics strong, and then from there branching out and trying new things. What does that look like, right? If you've ever gotten married or had a kid, you've gotten the same question every single time, right? People are going to ask you, "Oh, how are you sleeping? Oh, how is married life treating you? When's the baby coming?" Like, these are all things that prospects are asked on a daily basis in the forms of being pitched over the phone. And so, in addition to the basics, any way you can stand out to those prospects, whether it's telling jokes. I once sang Eminem to a prospect on the phone, wearing a hot dog costume, or even starting your intros off differently, will set you apart from the pack and essentially let you penetrate your prospect more than the last SDR.
I love that. And you've shown the hot dog costume can work. And the analogy of just standing out in terms of the same questions you get over and over again is just so accurate. And I think anyone who's been on the other end of the call can vouch for that. So that's such a good final piece of advice. Yeah, well, I mean, thanks for your time. And anyone who can copy some of this advice that you've given is definitely going to be on their way to hitting quota, if not being 200, 300, 400% past it. So thanks a lot for your time today.
No, I appreciate it, mate. Thank you. Thank you for having me.